The Nobel Prize Winners in Literature. Nobilius was the ancestral name, by tradition, of that family whose representative, Alfred Nobel, has left a name synonymous with inventiveness and large benefactions to humanity. The grandfather, Emmanuel, an army surgeon, is accredited with changing the family name to Nobel. His son, Emmanuel, father of Alfred, taught science in Stockholm as a young man. With inventive ability, he experimented with explosives, submarine mines, and other destructive forces and, by paradox, became designer of surgical appliances and India rubber cushions to relieve suffering. He was interested in ship construction and spent some time in Egypt. To his sons, he transmitted his spirit of scientific research, with all the dangers as well as the inspiration of such ambition. 2 explosions, during experiments with nitroglycerin and other chemicals, caused severe loss. The first, occurring about 1837 in Stockholm, shattered the nerves of the people as well as their windows, so that Emmanuel went to Russia, on the advice of friends prominent in affairs of industry and government. Here, he was employed by the Russians to continue his experiments with submarine mines. With his family, he remained here until after the Crimean War, contributing to naval warfare by his inventions. An older son, Ludwig, remained in Russia when his family returned to Sweden. This son gained repute as an engineer and discovered the petroleum springs at Baku. A second explosion in one of the factories of Sweden, in 1864, caused the death of a younger son of Emmanuel Nobel, and shocked the father so severely that he was an invalid physically for the rest of his life. Alfred Bernhard Nobel was born at Stockholm in 1833. He was less robust than his brothers. He was sensitive and nervous, suffering from headaches all his life. His mother, Caroline Henrietta Alsell, was his devoted comrade from the early days when he would lie on the couch while she read to him or told him sagas and hero stories. She was wise and happy by nature, confident that Alfred would become a great man in spite of poor physique and moods of depression. He never married, although he loved a young girl who died in her youth, but he was devoted to his mother to the end of her life. Letters and frequent visits to her in Sweden in his later life kept alive his affectionate nature and his idealism. Like his father, he showed studious interest in chemistry, physics, and mechanical engineering. Shipbuilding attracted his attention for a time, and, when he was about 17, he was sent to the United States to increase his knowledge of mechanics as applied to ships by association with John Ericsson. At the home of the latter on Franklin Street, New York, where a tablet has been placed to commemorate the services of this inventor in the Civil War, young Nobel lived for a time. His father sent him to John Ericsson in order to investigate an invention of his, an engine which was supposed to work by heat from the sun. He stayed several months, probably not more than a year. Ericsson was passing through a period of fluctuating fortunes. At the end of 1849, his balance was only $132.32. His total receipts for the year had been but $2,000. 2 years later, he recorded a balance of $8,690.10. In the interval, he had sold several patents and had received congratulations from the King of Sweden upon the great future for his test caloric engine. This was the goal of his experiments during these years. Its success was to be tested in the trial trip of the Ericsson, February 11th, 1853. A squall came up as the boat was launched and making headway, and it sank, carrying with it hopes of the inventor after years of experiment, and $500,000 of invested capital. Ericsson was crushed for a few weeks. How pluckily he recovered his courage, made his plans for the Monitor, offered that to the United States government, and won success for the cause of the North, is familiar history. Upon Alfred Nobel, with his quick, impressionable temperament, This direct contact with Ericsson must have left strong influences. Perhaps he decided then that, should fortune favor him, he would leave a fund to aid scientists in their experiments and to protect them against financial duress during periods of discouragement. When he returned to Sweden and Russia, he cooperated with his father and brothers in manufacturing nitroglycerin and other explosives. He was constantly seeking for a compound which would be more powerful and less dangerous. In 1857, at St. Petersburg, he had taken out a patent for a gasometer. It has been said that the discovery of what was later known as dynamite came by accident to Alfred Nobel during an experiment about 1865 to 1866. Some nitroglycerin had escaped into the siliceous sand of the packing, and this brought about a partial solution of his problem. Dynamite, which was composed of 75% nitroglycerin and 25% kieselguhr, or infusorial earth, was produced. He applied for patents in several countries and sought for funds to start factories which he believed would make a fortune by manufacture of this new explosive. It was sometimes called Nobel's blasting oil. He told French bankers that he had invented an oil that would blow up the world. A facetious commentator declared, French bankers thought it for their interest to leave the globe undisturbed and refused him credit. Napoleon III became interested and arranged for funds for Nobel's factories in France. With some samples of dynamite in his handbag, Alfred Nobel came to the United States on the same commercial mission. New York hotels received him with suspicion because of rumors about the deadly explosive. He went to California where, through the aid of Dr. Banman, a friend of Nobel's brother, a factory was started near Los Angeles. In a few years, manufactories were in operation in Italy, Spain, France, and Scotland, as well as England and Sweden. When Alfred Nobel was 40 years old, he was making his fortune out of this giant powder. For several years, he lived in Paris where he had laboratories for further experiments with gelatin, ballastite, and forms of smokeless powder. In his later home, in San Remo, he carried on developments and took out more patents in petroleum and artificial gutta percha. He received the tribute of scientists and educators, but the ignorant people regarded him with a mixture of awe and fear. He had put the long hammer of Thor to work again among the giants. In spite of his inspiring life work and many successes, in spite of his wealth and honors, Alfred Nobel was a lonely man. His health was unstable. He often worked with bandaged head and in intense pain, accentuated by the gaseous fumes of his laboratory. He was self-distrustful and fearful that people were attracted to him only by his wealth. One of the few individuals who gained and kept his confidence was Baroness Bertha von Suttner. In her memoirs, the personality of Alfred Nobel is revealed in comments and letters. She came to him in response to an advertisement in a Paris newspaper, asking for a secretary for a very wealthy, cultured gentleman. She remained only a few days in her joint capacity of secretary and housekeeper. For a happy solution of her interrupted romance with the Baron von Suttner eventuated in her speedy marriage. She exchanged letters and visits with Alfred Nobel for many years, and was devoted to him in life and in memory. She describes him as somewhat below average height, without physical attractiveness, but in no sense repulsive, as he imagined himself to be. He was a fine linguist, somewhat of a philosopher, a good conversationalist, and entertaining as a storyteller. He allowed her to read a long philosophical poem which he had written in English, and she found it simply splendid. He was critical of the shallow, false-hearted people, especially those who importuned him with low motives, but he had faith in a better development of humanity as education progressed. One of his few intellectual companions in Paris was Madame Juliette Adams, author and editor of the Nouvelle Revue. At her salon in Rue Juliet, Nobel would meet occasionally men of science and letters. In the memoirs of Baroness von Suttner may be located the first intimations of Nobel's motives which led to the Nobel Prizes, especially the specific form which was known as the Peace Prize. It will be recalled that the Baroness von Suttner was one of the early winners of this prize by her widely read romance, Die Waffen nieder, Lay Down Your Arms. In 1890, after the publication of this story, advocating world peace, Nobel wrote letters of high commendation. On another occasion he said to her, "I wish I could produce a substance or a machine of such frightful efficacy for wholesale devastation that wars should thereby become altogether impossible." He contended with the mind of a prophet that a day might come when two army corps may mutually annihilate each other in a second. Then he believed that all civilized nations will recoil and disband their troops. On January 7th, 1893, 3 years before his death, he wrote to the Baroness from Paris, "I should like to dispose of a part of my fortune by founding a prize to be granted every 5 years, say 6 times, for if in 30 years they have not succeeded in reforming the present system, they will infallibly relapse into barbarism. If the Triple Alliance, instead of comprising only 3 states, should enlist all states, the peace of the centuries would be assured." Affirming his belief in reasonable socialism, he deplored the custom of leaving large fortunes to heirs. Too often the results were lapses in mental ambitions and industry. On December 10th, 1896, Alfred Nobel died suddenly in his workshop at San Remo. For a long time he had realized his condition of reduced vitality. He consulted doctors unwillingly and heeded their counsel with reluctance. He kept a record of his own pulse and heart action, but he never desisted from a full day's work in his laboratory. His last letters have a sad note that is sometimes sarcastic, yet he kept faith in and with humanity to the last. He had been carefully considering the disposal of his fortune, determined that it should contribute to progress in science and literature for the welfare of mankind and the education towards world peace. His will startled the civilized world by its originality and idealism. The man who had been most successful in inventing elements of destruction by a paradox had left most of his large fortune to constructive, creative purposes. Because he distrusted many lawyers, he had been his own legal adviser in large measure. Sometimes he had acted as his own secretary, lest an outsider might abuse his confidence. In appointing Monsieur Ragnar Sohlmann as executor, he explained that here was a man who had never asked anything of me. Later, the manager of the factory at Bergen became associate executor. He left legacies of £5,000 each to his nephews, but some efforts to break the will were threatened. Emmanuel, then head of the family, refused to sanction such interference, and, after many complications and delays, the will was allowed, and varied equivocal or impractical conditions were interpreted by Code of Statutes, issued by the King of Sweden, June 29, 1900. From this pamphlet is quoted here the extract from the will. Extract from the will and testament of Dr. Alfred Bernhard Nobel, engineer, which was drawn on the 27th day of November, 1895. With the residue of my convertible estate, I hereby direct my executors to proceed as follows. They shall convert my said residue of property into money, which they shall then invest in safe securities. The capital thus secured shall constitute a fund, the interest accruing from which shall be annually awarded in prizes to those persons who shall have contributed most materially to benefit mankind during the year immediately preceding. The said interest shall be divided into 5 equal amounts, to be apportioned as follows. 1 share to the person who shall have made the most important discovery or invention in the domain of physics. 1 share to the person who shall have made the most important chemical discovery or improvement. 1 share to the person who shall have made the most important discovery in the domain of physiology or medicine. 1 share to the person who shall have produced in the field of literature the most distinguished work of an idealistic tendency. And finally, 1 share to the person who shall have most or best promoted the fraternity of nations, and the abolishment or diminution of standing armies, and the formation and increase of peace congresses. In further details, the will provides, the prizes for physics and chemistry shall be awarded by the Swedish Academy of Science in Stockholm, the one for physiology or medicine by the Caroline Medical Institute in Stockholm, the one for literature by the Academy in Stockholm, i.e. Svenska Akademien, and that for peace by a committee of 5 persons to be elected by the Norwegian Storthing. I declare it to be my express desire that in the awarding of prizes, no consideration whatever be paid to the nationality of the candidates, that is to say, that the most deserving be awarded the prize, whether of Scandinavian origin or not. Because of difficulties in interpreting certain sections and elucidating other phrases, this code of statutes was drawn up, in consultation with a representative, nominated by Robert Nobel's family, and submitted to consideration of the king. After adjustments of interests had been amicably entered into by the testator's heirs, June 5, 1898, it was decreed that the instructions of the will above as set forth shall serve as a criterion for the administration of the foundation, Nobel, in conjunction with the elucidations and further stipulations contained in this code. One stipulation was that each of the annual prizes founded by the said will shall be awarded at least once during each ensuing 5-year period after the year in which the Nobel Foundation comes into force. The phrase used by Nobel in the words relating to the prize in literature, the Academy at Stockholm, was interpreted as understood to be the Swedish Academy, Svenska Akademien. Another significant explanation was, the term literature used in the will shall be understood to embrace not only works falling under the category of polite literature, but also other writings which may claim to possess literary value by reason of their form or their mode of exposition. This last provision, which seems elastic and somewhat vague, has not led thus far to undue difficulties and criticisms. The phrase, during the preceding year, as applied to scientific and literary achievements alike, was a strange, impractical provision, which was well interpreted broadly in the code, thus: only such works or inventions shall be eligible as have appeared during the preceding year, is to be understood. That a work or invention for which a reward under the terms of the will is contemplated, shall set forth the most modern results of work being done in that of the departments, as defined in the will to which it belongs. Works or inventions of older standing to be taken into consideration only in case their importance has not previously been demonstrated. 2 other stipulations were made that have been applied to the awards in literature, as elsewhere. The amount allotted to one prize may be divided equally between 2 works submitted, should each of such works be deemed to merit a prize. Thus, in 1904, the prize was divided between José Echegaray, the Spanish dramatist, and Frédéric Mistral, the poet of Provence. Again, in 1917, it was divided between 2 Danish writers, Gjellerup and Pontoppidan. On the other hand, if all of the works under examination fail to attain to the standard of excellence required, no award need be given that year. The amount added to the main fund, or may be set aside to form a special fund for that of one of the sections to promote the object of the testator. In 1914 and 1918, there were no awards in literature. To facilitate impartial judgment, it was directed that each of the 4 sections of the Swedish Corporation of Award shall appoint a committee, their Nobel Committee, of 3 or 5 members to make suggestions with reference to the award. To be a member of this Nobel Committee, one need not be a Swedish subject or member of the corporation. How are these candidates for prizes nominated, is a frequent question. It is stated explicitly in this Code of Statutes, Section 7. It is essential that every candidate for a prize under the terms of the will be proposed as such in writing by some duly qualified person, a direct application for a prize will not be taken into consideration. Further explanations are given of qualifications entitling a person to propose another for the receipt of a prize. He must be a representative, whether Swedish or otherwise, of the domain of science, literature, etc. in question, and the grounds for the award must be stated in writing. In this same Code of Statutes, in a later section, P23, there is expanded information regarding the right to nominate a candidate for the prize competition. This shall belong to members of the Swedish Academy and the academies in France and Spain, which are similar to it in constitution and purpose. Members also of the humanistic classes of other academies and of those humanistic institutions and societies that are on the same footing as academies, and teachers of aesthetics, literature, and history at universities and colleges. For publicity, it was provided that these regulations shall be publicly announced at least every 5 years in some official or widely circulated journals in each of the 3 Scandinavian countries, and in the chief countries of the civilized world. The names of candidates must be presented by February 1st of each year. Although the successful candidates for the various prizes are usually broadcasted, in these days of shrewd journalism, sometime in November, the official announcements of the awards are made on Founders' Day, the 10th of December, the anniversary of the death of the testator. At this time, the adjudicators shall make known the result of their award and shall hand over to the winners of the prizes a cheque for the amount of the same, together with a diploma and a medal in gold, bearing the testator's effigy and a suitable legend. The last word may be more freely translated inscription. In further explanation, the Code of Statutes decrees, it shall be incumbent on a prize winner, whenever feasible, to give a lecture on the subject treated of in the work to which the prize has been awarded, such lecture to take place within 6 months of the Founders' Day, at which the prize was won, and to be given at Stockholm, or, in the case of the Peace Prize, at Christiania. This feature of the award has not often been feasible in literature, although a few of the winners have received the prizes in person at Stockholm, and made fitting responses, as we shall note in later chapters. The decree is final. Against the decision of the adjudicators in making their award, no protest can be lodged. If differences of opinion have occurred, they shall not appear in the minutes of the proceedings, nor in any other way be made public. To assist in their investigations, and to further the aims of the Foundation, the adjudicators shall possess powers to establish scientific institutes and other organizations. The institutes so established and belonging to the Foundation shall be known under the name of Nobel Institutes. While the general administration of the funds and awards rests with the Nobel Foundation, consisting of 5 persons, one of whom, the President, shall be appointed by the King, and the others by the delegates of the adjudicating corporations. The specific work of investigation and judgment rests with the organization cited in the will. In literature, the prizes are assigned by the Swedish Academy, after careful investigation by its members, and the assistance of the Nobel Institute and librarian, a large collection of books, mostly of modern writings, forms the library. In all languages, translations, when necessary, are found here, also reports concerning works of recent publication. The Swedish Academy was founded by King Gustavus III in 1786. It has devoted itself to the arts of elocution and poetry, to the preservation of purity, force, and elevation of diction in the Swedish language, both in scientific works and products of pure literature. Annual prizes have been offered for scores of years in elocution and poetry. 18 members, all Swedes, comprise this academy, of which the king is patron. He appoints the inspector of the Nobel Institute of the Swedish Academy, but its immediate management is by a member of the Academy, chosen by that body. 2 conditions of the will of Alfred Nobel have been faithfully followed. The recipients in all branches have done something, if not most, to benefit humanity. In the second place, no consideration whatever has been paid to the nationality of the candidates in the way of favoritism. The most reasonable criticism of the awards, especially in literature, has been a failure to carry out what seems to have been the assumed, but not expressed, desire of the donor, namely, to stimulate work as well as to reward past achievements. Otherwise, why that puzzling phrase about the year preceding? Not wholly without foundation is the comment that too many of the awards in literature have been tombstones rather than stepping stones. Many of the earlier recipients were past 70, with productive faculties low, before the honor. It is a satisfaction to the public to know that a worthy writer has had world recognition before he dies, and that his last days may have many comforts possible through the financial award of about $40,000. But such conditions do not seem in accord with the spirit of the Nobel will and the attitude of the donor toward creative work. The awards have been too often retroactive rather than stimulating to further writing. Other winners, as will be noted later, have accomplished vigorous literature after the award as well as before the honor. During the years from 1901, when the first prizes were given, to 1925, 12 nationalities have been represented in literature. Germany and France have had the largest percentages in awards. Spain, Italy, Poland, Norway, Sweden have had 2 winners each. Great Britain, including the awards to Rabindranath Tagore and to Yeats as well as Kipling, has been thrice honored. Denmark divided the prize 1 year. Switzerland came into the lists with her poet, Carl Spittler. In science and promotion of peace, America has such names on the roster of honor as A.A. Michelson in physics, T.W. Richards in chemistry, Dr. Alexis Carrel in medicine, and Theodore Roosevelt, Elihu Root, and Woodrow Wilson in the Peace Prize. What have been the influences of the will of Alfred Nobel and the awards upon international literature? An unquestioned result has been to arouse both curiosity and aspiration among writers and readers. No other prizes, among any peoples, have caused such widespread interest. The announcement of the Nobel Prizes each year has become an event of outstanding significance. Journals enter into competition, in recent years, to get the first word over the wires and to publish the most informing articles upon the winners. Tense interest precedes and follows the awards. Whatever may be one's individual opinion about the justice in every instance, the fact remains that the chosen writer becomes the center of study and discussion for the current season and later years. To some critics, this method of appreciation is offensive. Sometimes it may seem to be a sensational thrust into the limelight of an insignificant or mediocre writer. In the majority of cases, the result is like that of a strong telescope which can distinguish the fixed stars from the meteors in the literary horizon. The second influence is upon writers of every nationality, an incentive to produce a distinguished work of an idealistic tendency, some book which will prove of benefit to humanity. This term, idealistic, is difficult to render in all languages. In the French explanation of the will, it is explicit, le plus remarquable, dans le sens de l'idéalisme. It is not easy to justify the prizes in literature, in several cases, if one emphasizes the usual meaning of idealistic. Occasionally, the award was given for some less recent work, some hitherto unappreciated note of idealism in an earlier writing. 2 examples, among many, are Björnson's tales of peasant life, with interwoven sagas and poetry, Anna and a Happy Boy, or Mistral's Mireo, the pastoral poem of Provence, which was written more than 40 years before the prize was given. In these 2 cases, as will be noted later, there was appreciation of efforts to rescue a dialect or language from literary desuetude. Upon both writers and readers, The influence of the Nobel Awards in literature has been to promote broader interests and sympathies, more earnest study of standards and aspirations in widely separated races. The writings of Rudyard Kipling before and after the award. The prize of 1907 has been awarded. Kipling, Rudyard, born 1865. In consideration of the power of observation, originality of imagination, and also the manly strength in the art of perception and delineation that characterize the writings of this world-renowned author. 6 years passed after the first prizes were given in literature from the Nobel Fund. The countries honored thus far had been France, Germany, Norway, Spain, Italy, and Poland. Where is Great Britain on the literary map? Asked certain speakers and writers. Names of British authors had been sent to the committee of the Nobel Foundation and the Swedish Academy, with ardent commendation by individuals and academic circles. Prominent among such names, suggested in the press, had been Swinburne, George Meredith, John Morley, Thomas Hardy, Barrie, and Robert Bridges. One journal asked, "Why not Kipling?" The answer came in the announcement that the award for 1907 was given to Rudyard Kipling, poet and storyteller. Again the issue, what is idealism, was raised and challenged by some opponents of this choice. Yet on the whole, it met with wide favor. Kipling's type of robust idealism was defended. Said W. B. Parker, his idealism needs no other evidence than the enthusiastic following he has had from boys. Combined with this robust idealism are two other qualities of Kipling as writer that have given him the enthusiastic following of boys: his virility and courage. For adolescents and college youths, he has upheld the ideals of vigorous action, of honor and bravery, of daring in speech and deed. In his dynamic poems and tales of the day's work, Kim, Life's Handicap, and the other volumes so familiar, he reflects his gospel of fearlessness that does not hesitate to shock some who abide by the conventional standards of speech. Gilbert K. Chesterton has said forceful truths about this trait of Kipling in Heretics. He affirms that credit is due to Kipling for his appreciation of slang and steam. He expands the thought thus: steam may be, if you like, a dirty byproduct of science. Slang may be, if you like, a dirty byproduct of language. But at least he has been among the few who saw the living parentage of these things and knew that where there is smoke, there is fire. That is, wherever there is the foulest of things, there also is the purest. Mr. Chesterton declares that Kipling's type of courage is not that of war, nor valor of the battlefield, but that interdependence and efficiency which belongs quite as much to engineers or sailors or mules or railway engineers. Recurrent in memory are such tales as The Bridge Builders, The Ship That Found Herself, Dozo 7, with the night mail, and Wireless. One trait sharply differentiates Kipling from some of his colleagues among the Nobel Prize winners. He is a patriot poet, but with less ardent tribute than is found in the verse of Mistral and Björnson and Heidenstam. Perhaps his open criticism of his country in certain political crises has barred him from the laureateship. His frank, democratic attitude in later years, somewhat in contrast with earlier utterances of imperialism, finds expression in every stanza of A Pilgrim's Way. Few poets, however, have written such magnetic lines in urgence of fitness, honor, and service for country as has Kipling, in the familiar words of If, For All We Have and Are, the children's song, and the refrain in the poem in Land and Sea Tales for Scouts and Scoutmasters, dash dash. Be fit, for honor's sake, be fit. He is patriotic with the world knowledge of a travelled man. Two examples in proof are found in The Return and The English Flag, with the pertinent query. And what should they know of England who only England know? In recent years, it has been a fad in certain journals to depreciate Kipling and to charge against him faults of narrowness in outlook and lack of modernism. Especially during the years of the war and its immediate aftermath, one found tones of sad, somewhat cynical writing. In large measure, this was due to the personal trials of the time and the loss of his son. That elegiac poem, My Boy Jack, 1914 to 1918, will live as a heart-gripping memorial. In his speech at the Sorbonne, November 19, 1921, he gave evidences of spiritual recovery. He said, "One cannot resume a broken world as easily as one can resume a broken sentence. But before long, our sons who have spent themselves in suffering and toiling to abolish the menace of barbarism will recover also from the menace of moral lassitude." With old-time sprightliness and vigor, he wrote, in the spring of 1924, the stanzas A Song of the French Roads, after a visit to France and the joyful experience of finding the roads to the border, that had been laid out by Napoleon and devastated by the war, were now repaired and open to traffic. It was the Kipling of the earlier years of writing who received the Nobel Prize. He was 42 years old, one of the youngest winners. He had already published volumes of prose and verse that would be creditable to a writer of twice his age. Born at Bombay, December 30th, 1865, he inherited intellectual promise from both parents. His father, John Lockwood Kipling, an artist, was at that time director of the Lahore School of Industrial Art. He was a delightful storyteller and expertly trained in technical and artistic knowledge. He illustrated some of his son's earlier tales. A book by him, entitled Beast and Man in India, with unusual drawings, was attributed to Rudyard Kipling, London, 1891. Alice MacDonald, the mother, gave to her son a keen zest in life and a rare sense of humour. Her devotion has had many lines of commemoration, notably in such a poem as Mother O' Mine. The boy was named Joseph Rudyard, but he seldom used the first name. The second, in memory of a lake in England where his father and mother had met, is so arresting and unique that it has been called one of the causes of his first appeal to the curious public. After his early boyhood in India, leaving with him strong impressions and love for the land, he was sent to Southsea, Devonshire, to school, and later to the United Services College at Westward Ho He, was homesick for his mother, and found it difficult to mix well with the English-born boys. Storky and Company is largely autobiographical of this period. In 1880, he returned to India, anxious to enter journalism and know the native people, especially in the army. The story runs that once, when Kipling was doing journalistic work in Lahore, the Duke of Connaught visited the place and asked the young man what he would prefer to do in India. The reply came promptly, "I would like, sir, to live with the army for a time, and go to the frontier to write up Tommy Atkins." The request was granted, and the literary results in later years are listed in Department Ditties, Soldiers 3, Under the Deodars, and many more stories in volumes, from Plain Tales from the Hills to Eyes of Asia. Much discussion has been rife about the truth or exaggeration of Kipling's pictures of India, especially types of army men and officers' wives. Many critics who have travelled in India affirm the photographic quality of the tales and verse, but some raise the issue of the tone. Is it sincere or sardonic? Others, who claim to have talked with certain natives, condemn both the spirit and the characterizations. To the charge of insincerity or disloyalty, there seems to be a firm answer in the friendly prelude to Departmental Ditties, which has a prominent place in the inclusive edition of Rudyard Kipling's verse. He lays stress, in the last stanza, upon the jesting guise, but he emphasizes also his loyalty to these people, especially in the second stanza. Was there aught that I did not share, in vigil or toil or ease? One joy or woe that I did not know, dear hearts across the seas. During these years, from 1882 to 1889, while he was doing journalistic work and associating with civil and military representatives in Lahore, Bombay, and Mandalay. He was writing stories and verses which appeared in the newspaper columns of India. The first issue in book form was by A. H. Wheeler and Company of Allahabad, a little book in grey paper covers, which was sold at railway stations. In his own hand, and with striking illustrations, Kipling edited some of his early tales. One such, Wee Willie Winkie, dedicated to his mother, with others that formed an illustrated set, found a purchaser in J. Pierpont Morgan, in recent years, at a price stated to be $17,000. When Kipling was 25 years old, with his memory packed with scenes of adventure and characters in India, and his pockets filled with unpublished tales and verse, he decided to try his literary fate in England. He travelled by way of the Pacific to California and reached New York with hopes of editorial encouragement because he had letters of introduction. He was not received with cordiality. Perhaps, in later years, some of these editors and publishers regretted their lost chance to launch a new genius. In London, he attracted attention slowly, but with influence from family and officials, he won recognition by critics and reading public. One of the first to appreciate Kipling's unique work was Andrew Lang. Later, he was severe in criticism of certain faults. One of his essays upon Kipling of the earlier tales is included in Essays in Little, Scribner's, 1891. It has a prophetic note, an emphasis of the brilliance of colour, the strange varied themes, the perfume of the East. The Nobel Prize was given to Kipling because of these qualities of his earlier work, as well as his more mature, potent messages. He had, from the first, rare ability to revivify, to secure for future generations of readers the real and the romantic in Anglo-India of the later 19th century. He preserved the landscapes, the customs, the ideals, the intrigues, the foibles, even the slang of the natives and the British soldiers. Just as Mistral saved the language and romances of Provence from oblivion in his Mireio and other poems. Just as Björnson recorded the almost forgotten sagas of Norway and blended these with modern peasant life, so Kipling made literary use of this unfamiliar material of India. His idealism converted the ordinary, often petty and rough aspects of life into stories and verses of undying flavour, like The Phantom Rickshaw, Soldiers 3, Drums of the Fore and Aft, On the City Wall, Mandrew's Hymn, Danny Diva, Mandalay, and The Lover's Litany. Here are recorded days of adventure and danger, nights of memory and longing. In 1902, more than 10 years after he left India, he wrote one of his most appealing poems, The Broken Men, the exiles from England, with their pluck and their pathos, which grips the sympathies like those tales of O. Henry about the American self-imposed exiles in Central America. The later visit that Kipling made to the United States cheered his heart, in contrast to the earlier reception. He had met Caroline Balestier, sister of Wolcott Balestier, a young man with whom Kipling became intimate in London and with whom he collaborated in the novel, The Nolaka. Their home was in Brattleboro, Vermont. In 1892, Miss Balestier was married to Kipling in All Souls Church, Portland Place, London. They came to Vermont to live for a few years in the unique house which Kipling built for his bride overlooking Brattleboro. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle accredits him with chivalrous devotion to his wife, which caused him to come to America lest she might miss her home and friends. Before coming to America, they took a journey round the world, or a segment of it. The death of Wolcott Balestier was a deep grief to his friend and a loss to American literature. In Dedicatory Elegy, Barrack Room Ballads, Kipling wrote the lines of noble characterization. E'en as he trod that day to God, so walked he from his birth, in simpleness and gentleness and honour and clean mirth. For the little daughter, who died at an early age, Kipling wrote his first Jungle Book. In this American home he wrote Also, many of the poems collected in the Seven Seas and the short stories. Many inventions. In the latter book were the daring pictures of life like the disturber of traffic, the haunting tale of the lost legion, and the tragic lover women. The inspiration of Mrs. Kipling, her perfect appreciation of her husband's gifts and moods, and her gracious influence have been attested by him in many tender words, as well as in the more impersonal tributes to womanhood of brains and heart, which one finds expressed in From Sea to Sea, or His Chance in Life. The world will never forget the persistent story that Mrs. Kipling saved from the wastebasket, that grand hymn of all time, the recessional. In some of his tales, he antagonized Americans, notably in The Light That Failed and An Habitation Enforced in Actions and Reactions. As compensation, one recalls An Error of the Fourth Dimension from Plain Tales, the story of Wilton Sargent, American. The writing of Kipling showed advance in form during the decade from 1890 to 1900. There was gradual elimination of the jingoism and cynicism which tainted some of his earlier work. In 1897, he visited South Africa again. He recounted an actual experience in riding on a Cape government railway in his tale 07, among the stories in the day's work, published in 1898. In this same collection is found The Brushwood Boy, a masterpiece of mystic idealism, which will stand beside his more poetic allegory, They. The year 1899 has been regarded sometimes as a crisis in the life of Kipling, which affected his later writing. On his arrival in New York, in the late autumn of that year, he was attacked by a severe case of pneumonia and was desperately ill for many weeks. The press of America, England, and the continent awaited the bulletins with anxiety. He recovered, but some critics have affirmed that he lost his vigor and literary power. Looking over the dates of his poems and recalling the books which have appeared since this crisis, such a surmise is not warranted. One could scarcely expect that any author could continue to write, on a level or ascending scale, many more books about India than he had already written, or many more poems of vital spell like If, When Earth's Last Picture is Painted, and Mandrew's Hymn. He had already proved his ability to write for children and adolescents. Few books among juveniles surpass, in visualization and imaginative skill, the Jungle Books, Just So stories, and that pioneer sea tale that has gained favor with the years, Captains Courageous. In the years that followed his serious illness, he wrote tales of clever inventiveness, collected in Puck of Pook's Hill, Rewards and Fairies, and Kim. To this period belong, also, many of the poems collected in the volume, The Five Nations. Who will say that there was decadence of literary power, any lapse of dramatic skill, in that story of Kim, or Kimball O'Hara, the orphan boy of Lahore? The boys of today, and normal girls, have wholesome thrills at this lad's story, his pilgrimages over India with the Tibetan Lama, and his final adoption by the regiment to which his father had belonged. Humor, adventure, vivid photographs of places and people, all are mingled in this tale. When it appeared in the London edition of 1901, the father of Kipling contributed some of the striking illustrations. The Five Nations of this later period gave permanence in form to such vital poems as White Horses, Our Lady of the Snows, the beautiful Ode to Canada, The Dykes, The Feet of the Young Men, Boots, The Explorer, and The Recessional, Buddha at Kamakura, which first appeared in Kim, should be listed in this collection. Are there here traces of lapse in form or spontaneity compared with the earlier, less restrained verses in departmental ditties or barrack room ballads? In Traffics and Discoveries, published in 1904, are found such literary achievements as Wireless, They, and The Army of a Dream. Kipling had shown his keen observation, humor, and appreciation of varied beauties of nature in his volumes of travel sketches and letters, From Sea to Sea and Letters of Travel. In Sight of Monadnock contains a brief, fine description of that distant New Hampshire peak. With his long experience in travel and adjustment to diverse conditions of life, Kipling has ever been a poet of home, national and domestic. His poem, Sussex, written in 1902, has deep feeling as well as notable lines of description and a rhythmic swing. New poets and story writers came into prominence with the 20th century. Although Kipling was in his full maturity and vigor when the Nobel Prize was awarded, with years of promising creative work before him, he had been so long before the public that it became the fashion, in some brilliant, cynical groups, to speak of him as belonging to the older generation. His volumes attracted less attention in competition with those of mere modernism. The announcement of the Nobel Prize in 1907 aroused interest anew in every country. In looking over the Kipling bibliographical cards in the Widener Library at Harvard University, it is interesting to find records of translations of his books into Danish, Dutch, French, German, Italian, Norwegian, Polish, Russian, Serbian, Spanish, Swedish. The journals took occasion to review what he had accomplished in literature before 1907, to commend or reprove the decision of the Swedish Academy in giving him a prize for idealistic literature. Some cited his imperialistic complex and quoted "the man who would be king." In current literature for October 1908 are quotations from diverse opinions, said the London Nation. There is hardly any English writer more closely identified with the doctrine of force or a firmer believer that the deity is to be found on the side of the big battalions. The New York World declared, "He sings of bloodlust, with a schoolboy's disregard of consequences." The Chicago Post believed that his idealism was the idealization of might, but it praised his strong biblical English. Comments of this kind fail to recognize the two paradoxical traits in Kipling's nature and writings. There is stark realism, sometimes relentless, as in The Courtship of Dinah Shadd, The Gate of 100 Sorrows, My Son's Wife, or poems like The Galley Slave, Danny Deever, and Kitchener's School. Close beside this realism, penetrating and often sordid, sounds a note of idealism, a promise of a happy issue out of all troubles, a vision that comes to an idealist recall that in the day's work there is the tense realistic tale of the devil and the deep sea, and within a few pages the idyll of the brushwood boy. Since the Nobel Prize was received, Kipling has written with less frequency and more unevenness of form. Some of the prose and verse reflects the war, like Fringes of the Fleet, Sea Warfare, France, and the History of the Irish Guards. Not soon forgotten will be that tribute to Roosevelt, tender and virile, Great Heart, 1919. In the collected poems, The Years Between, there are challenging war poems, For All We Have and Are, An Appeal to England, and The Choice or the American Spirit Speaks, for the United States. The elegy to Lord Roberts, less militant in tone, is true poetry in emotion and measure. Some stanzas are touched by irony and have the sermonic quality which is characteristic, The Sons of Martha, Endor, and Russia to the Pacifists. The Juvenile of 1923, Land and Sea Tales for Boys and Girls, or for Scouts and Scoutmasters, is uneven in quality, but it has two dramatic sketches. Eyes of Asia, Portraits of Europeans as Seen by Oriental Eyes, is more comparable to mediocre pages in Actions and Reactions than it is to the more vital stories in Plain Tales and The Day's Work. Fumes of the Heart is the best of these later tales. Mr. Kipling is reaping honours in educational and civic life. His reserve, which is sometimes rated as coldness, keeps him far from the limelight of publicity. He cannot be persuaded to come to America as lecturer or reader, in the train of many of his compatriots of far less worth or fame. In his Sussex home, with family and a few friends about him, he is a delightful raconteur or conversationalist upon topics of worldwide politics. He is more amused than angered at some of the petty criticisms upon his writing, like the recent attack upon Mandalay for its anachronisms in geography, not unlike the charges against Shakespeare in The Tempest and The Winter's Tale Arnold Bennett in Books and Persons, has some comments upon Kipling's flaws in actions and reactions and his prejudices and clayey ideals. But he ends with tribute to him as a painstaking artist devoted to his craft. Philip Godala, brilliant journalist and ironist, in his essays A Gallery, under caption of Mandalay, says much in little about the remoteness and antiquity of Kipling. He finds him so antiquated that the Dinosaurus might give him points in modernity. Despite such witty extravagances, however, the critic admits that Kipling has sharpened the English language to a knife edge, and with it has cut brilliant patterns on the surface of our prose literature. In both his prose and poetry, he has sharpened the English language to a knife edge. His verses may seem antiquated to the reader whose exclusive tastes welcome only new poetry and sneer at lilting rhymes and conventional meters. To broader minds, however, there is appreciation of the vibrant messages of spiritual courage, the bold and graphic excerpts from real life, in both the verse and the fiction of Kipling at his best. One of the honors that came to this writer recently was an invitation to give the rectorial address at St. Andrews University in 1923. This has been published in book form as Independence, similar in format to that of Barry's address, on a kindred occasion, entitled Courage. Mr. Kipling urges here the fundamental duty of developing one's individuality. After all, he says, yourself is the only person you can by no possibility get away from in this life, and maybe in another. It is worth a little pains and money to do good to him. His idealism is not that of mere sentiment, much less of sentimentality. It is the idealism of work, of action, of responsibility. It is the idealism, even in the midst of misjudgments, of carrying the white man's burden, of training youth towards clean, productive manhood. One grants that some of his writings, both prose and verse, might be eliminated from collections and memory. With an increase in his literary rank, he is uneven and was prone, in his earlier days, to mistake coarseness for vigor, yet he has been able to make his readers both listen and see. Perhaps he has not maintained the almost unanimous favoritism among college youths that he had 2 decades ago. There have been competitors, with college stories, of rank realism. But it may be questioned if any author of our day is more often quoted among both educated and unlettered adults. Mr. Kipling has never been tempted to lower his standards for commercial ends. With fearless truth, he has spoken messages of uprightness and service. A Song of the English is national, perhaps imperialistic, but it has, like scores of his other stanzas, a Catholic message to Christian nations everywhere. Keep ye the law, be swift in all obedience. Clear the land of evil, drive the road and bridge the ford. Make ye sure to each his own, that he reap where he hath sown. By the peace among our peoples, let men know we serve the Lord. Rabindranath Tagore, Bengalese mystic poet. The prize for the year 1913 has been awarded. Rabindranath Tagore, born 1861. For reason of the inner depth and the high aim revealed in his poetic writings. Also, for the brilliant way in which he translates the beauty and freshness of his Oriental thought into the accepted forms of Western belles lettres. As a Bengalese, Rabindranath Tagore, to whom the Nobel Prize was given in 1913, is a British subject. Thus, for the second time, the honour came to Great Britain through the writings of one whose formative years, like those of Kipling, had been spent in India, and whose typical writings were associated with that country. On the contrary, the words and thoughts of this mystic poet are so exotic, sometimes so unlocalized in form and spirit, that they belong to world literature rather than to a distinctive country. Possibly no other prize winner has been so idealistic, so international in his appeal as this author of The Gardener, Sadhana, and The King of the Dark Chamber. In his biographical study, Ernest Ries suggests that the award was given to Tagore because of the enthusiasm of a Swedish Orientalist for his writings before they were known in English. The year before the award, however, Yeats had praised the poems of Tagore, and other poet critics had found him an inspirational influence. To the winner, the announcement gave mingled gratitude and regret. The latter he expressed in his sentence, "They have taken away my refuge." His life had been so untouched by external struggles that he was, in truth, a child of nature. In My Reminiscences he writes, "From my earliest years I enjoyed a simple and intimate communion with nature. Each one of the coconut trees in our garden had for me a distinct personality. On opening my eyes every morning, the blithely awakening world used to call me to join it like a playmate." Rabindranath Tagore, born in Calcutta, May 6, 1861, he came into a rare inheritance for his later work as religious leader and writer. Like all children of the higher social classes in India, he was environed from his birth with poetic atmosphere. His blessing as a newborn babe was spoken in verse. As he grew older, many of his studies were in poetic form. The family name was Thakur, anglicized into Tagore. His father and grandfathers had been identified with education and civil reforms. Raja Sir Surendra Mohun Tagore was founder of the Bengal Music School. Another, Abanindranath Tagore, was a noted painter and leader in art movements. His father might have been a Maharaja, a great king, but he preferred to be Maharshi, a great sage. Thus he was more closely linked with the people than with nobility. He insisted upon paying debts which his father, a prince, had left. He would have made himself a pauper, but the creditors refused to accept such sacrifices, so he had a certain amount of property. He devoted himself to spiritual teachings and traveled through India on such missions, gaining the respect of all classes. The son who won this Nobel Prize was the youngest in a family of 7 brothers and 3 sisters. He was lonely as a child, for his mother died when he was young, and he was often left with menservants for days. The return of his father marked the gala days. His presence pervaded the whole house. Nature was the boy's comrade, and he would often dig with a bamboo stick in the ground to find any possible mysteries. Perfumes affected his senses and left vivid memories, as he tells in his Reminiscences. The school life, after he was 6 years, was a brief period of unhappiness. He was, perhaps, stubborn to a degree, and was ranked as the lowest in his class because he refused to answer orally, but he thought out problems so well in written work that he amazed his teachers and was given first place. The Oriental Seminary, the Normal School, the Bengal Academy, all seemed to him prison houses. At home he studied, with a tutor, history, sciences, and English literature. At first he laughed, somewhat scornfully, at English poetry because of the unusual sounds. An influence of this formative age was his nephew, older than he was, Jyotiprakash, who read Hamlet to the lad and urged him to write verses and poetic imaginings. He saw a future for this boy with his fancies and love of nature. A teacher at the Normal School also inspired him to write, asking him to complete lines or stanzas which had been begun by another. Although his father was often separated from the boy, he realized the child's promise and his sensitive nature. He gave him a vacation trip into the Himalayas, stopping at Bolpur, the Peace Cottage, where his father often retired and where the son was to have his own home later. In his blue blank book, that he carried always with him, were written poems suggested by scenery and incidents of this trip. His father taught him botany and astronomy, as well as English, Sanskrit and Bengali. Back in Calcutta, he played truant from school sometimes and caused his older sister to write in despair of the fulfillment of their hopes for him, that he would be the only unsuccessful man in the family. For a year he went to London to study law, but he was homesick and returned to Bengal. In his reminiscences at 50, he recalled the years between 16 and 23 as those of unrest and extreme wildness. He was the victim of the impulses of strong young manhood. For a time, he was an epicure rather than a mystic. He delighted in silk robes and luscious foods and romances in love. An expression of this time may be found in the poem "The Gleaming Vision of Youth" in The Gardener. Other reflections are in Sandhya Sangit and the Songs of Sunrise, more philosophical. Two poems, The Eternity of Life and The Eternity of Death, indicate the period of transition from this time to the years of religious meditation. At 23 he married happily. At the request of his father, he went to oversee the family estate at Shileda on the Ganges. Here, with intervals of travel, he remained for 17 years, living close to the people and to nature, and writing some of his tales and poems. One of his most famous love poems, showing mingled sensuous and spiritual strains, is The Beloved at Noon and in the Morning. In a houseboat on the Padma, he often spent hours of meditation, long evenings of reverie, that were pictured in the background of his idyllic song, Golden Bengal. He studied the poverty, trials, and simple idealism of the people. He knew elementary medicine and cared for the sick. He was saddened by the loss of rice crops in destructive rains. He was determined that tenants should not suffer unduly from tax gatherers. He brought upon himself the jealous criticism of British magistrates in the district, and was called a revolutionary and visionary disturber. He had already formulated his ideas of both a small republic and the school at Bolpur. When he was interrupted in his plans by domestic sorrows, he journeyed to England and the United States for recuperation and inspiration. The first grief was the death of his wife, for whom he had a deep love. Within a few months, his daughter died of tuberculosis. Shortly afterwards came another poignant sorrow in the loss of his youngest son. With the serenity of a mind that recognizes nature as mother and friend, he turned toward more intimate relations with spiritual and religious thoughts. These are revealed especially in Gitanjali, the first book by which he became well known to English readers. It was written in English with vigor and grace, with distinctive structure. In 1912-13, he came to the United States, partly for a change of scene, partly to add to his knowledge of industrial improvements and agricultural equipment, that he might apply this information in his school at Bolpur. His older son was with him to learn methods of harvesting. In his biographical study of Tagore, Basanta Kumar Roy tells interesting facts about the visit to this poet and discussion, with him, of the possibilities that he might win the Nobel Prize. He was then at Urbana, Illinois, with his son. He was impressed with the sunshine of our climate. Enchanted American days, he called them. He liked the superior engineering and business abilities of Americans, but he deplored their lack of culture. He was urged to translate more of his writings into English and was assured that, should he win the Nobel Prize, it would increase international brotherhood and world peace, as well as raise India among the nations. Skeptical of the probability, he said, should it come to him, he would use the money to start an industrial department in his school at Bolpur. 10 months later, the award was made to Tagore. Some of his compatriots were his most severe critics, complaining that he dabbled in too many forms of literature. He admitted the charge, but averred that poetry represented the deep truth of his life. As a poet, he has revived the work, in kind, of the Vaishnava poets of the 15th and 16th centuries, of mystic writers like the Upanishads, who lived between 2000 and 1000 BC. He adapted the beauties of these poets to modern interpretation. He was indebted, also, to Kabir, the mystic of the 15th century, and to Ramprasad of Bengal, of the 18th. In his form and spiritual progress, he has shown marked originality, following the work of Bengalese like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Bankim, who had cleared away many obstacles of British domination over native expression. Much has been written about the school at Bolpur, to which, true to his promise, he has devoted funds from his award. In his essays, Sadhana, or the realization of life, are found several of the student addresses made here. The war caused changed conditions and frustrated some of the founders' hopes. This school was started in 1902, approved by his father, and with the goal to revive the spirit of our ancient system of education, to make the students feel that there is a higher and a nobler thing in life than practical efficiency. At first, such a venture met with curiosity and some scorn. Parents sent here unmanageable or backward boys. They had simple surroundings and lived and slept outdoors. They sang chants as the birds begin their morning songs. They had time for individual prayer and thought, clad in white silk robes. They enjoyed games and long walks, simple food, no wine or meat, music in the evening and plays, written by Rabindranath Tagore. They wrote and illustrated school papers. There was self-government and close, brotherly relations between boys and teachers. Their scholastic work became satisfactory to the university at Calcutta. The boys were happy, often refusing to go home for their vacations, unless compelled to do so by their parents. In addition to his work as educator for boys, Rabindranath Tagore has been a strong influence for more training and freedom for the women of India. He believes that the life of woman, in a generic sense, is more full and harmonious than that of man. He found the ideas of both Hindu teachers and Christian missionaries were extreme, as he viewed them, but he advocated education and broadened opportunities. As an Oriental, he has poetized the love of the home, the coming of the woman at the end of the day, with a pitcher of nectar, to bring comfort to the home. His poetic play, Chitra, much discussed and puzzling in passages to a Western mind, is a frank exposition of his philosophy regarding the sensuous and spiritual qualities of women. Other expressions are in The Home and the World, 1919, and Personality, 1917, and in plays like Sannyas and The King and the Queen, in Sacrifice and Other Plays, New York, 1917. That he is a lover of children and able to interpret their thoughts and fancies with unmatched beauty is evident to all readers of Sir Rabindranath Tagore's writings. He was knighted in 1915. His own simplicity of nature and life, his imagination in its purity and freedom, make him an intimate comrade for boys and girls. The year after he received the Nobel Prize, the original unrhymed poems, The Crescent Moon, were translated with effective illustrations in colour. Stray Birds, with frontispiece in colour by Willie Pogany, 1921, is another appealing and typical book, but more mature and philosophical. The periods of childhood, from babyhood to school days and letter writing, are unfolded in The Crescent Moon in delightful pictures. Especially intuitive are Baby's World, Paper Boats, The Little Big Man, and The First Jasmines. Humour enlivens many of these fancies and questions of the child, as in 12 O'Clock and Authorship. The latter raises a query, why the mother allows father to waste heaps of paper without a protest, while a single sheet taken for a paper boat may bring a remonstrance to the child. There is emotional beauty and Oriental philosophy in the beginning. "Where have I come from?" asks the child, and the mother. She answered, half crying, half laughing and clasping the baby to her breast. You were hidden in my heart as its desire, my darling. In all my hopes and my loves, in my life, in the life of my mother, you have lived. In the lap of the deathless spirit who rules our home, you have been nursed for ages. As I gaze on your face, mystery overwhelms me. You who belong to all have become mine. During the 12 years since the Nobel Award, Tagore has translated several of his earlier poems, plays and tales, and has written My Reminiscences, one of the most illuminating autobiographies of the last decade. He has expanded his ideas on government, education and religion in books like Nationalism and Creative Unity. He has written prayers for Mother India, that she may be raised from her chronic want to a place of influence and success. He has urged united action by the people of England and those of India to bring about this material union. He has said, one section of the human race cannot be permanently strong by depriving another section of its inherent rights. Taking as his text that mooted line from Kipling, "Oh, east is east, and west is west, and never the twain shall meet." Tagore said at a banquet in London, I have learned that, though our tongues are different and our habits dissimilar, at the bottom of our hearts we are one. East is east, and west is west. God forbid that it should be otherwise. But the twain must meet in amity, peace, and mutual understanding. Their meeting will be all the more fruitful because of their differences. It must lead both to holy wedlock before the common altar of humanity. In the sympathetic analytical study of Mahatma Gandhi by Rolland, there are some excellent sentences of comparison of these two religious leaders of modern India. Tagore looked upon Gandhi as a saint, says Monsieur Rolland, and he deplored his political activities, especially his non-cooperation doctrine. Tagore seeks and finds harmony in cooperation. He wrote, My prayer is that India may represent the cooperation of all the peoples of the world. For India, unity is truth and division evil. In summary, the French writer says, To my mind, Gandhi is as universal as Tagore, but in a different way. Gandhi is a universalist through his religious feeling. Tagore is intellectually universal. While venerating him, Gandhi, we understand and approve Tagore. In Creative Unity, Tagore has included an essay upon the nation in which he stresses the fight today between the living spirit of the people and the methods of organizing nations. If one were to prophesy which type of Sir Rabindranath Tagore's writings will survive among many peoples, the chances are in favor of his mystical prose poems and his national songs. The latter have kept alive the love of home country and faith in India. They are sung by boatmen on the Ganges, by the peasants in the fields, by students and groups at all kinds of festivals and conferences. These songs are of two kinds. One is a wistful idealization of the motherland, with graphic pictures of scenery, homes and religion. The second type is the song of consecration, of sacrifice and valor, exampled in Follow the Gleam, to which many young nationalists have marched and died. Bitterness is absent from nearly every line by this poet-patriot. There is spiritual excitation, strong appeal to love of home and broader idealism. It has been said that contradiction is evident between some of these national songs and the broad humanism of many other writings, notably those in the Gitanjali. Those who know the man personally, and who are familiar with the tenets of Hindu philosophy which he embodies, as well as the spiritual ideals of the Upanishads, do not find it difficult to reconcile the two creeds, as he has united them in his Ode to the Earth and some of the essays in Sadhana. While it is gratifying to note that Rabindranath Tagore, as prize winner, found incentive to write more idealistic literature, yet it is evident that he never has surpassed the earlier books of distinctive quality, books that maintained the classic traditions of his native literature but gave them new form and significance, as the gardener, the post office, king of the dark chamber, Gitanjali, and the elder sister. When he was in the United States, he read at colleges and other places many passages from the Gardener and Gitanjali. The two books have similar tone and melody. Both are difficult to translate into adequate English because much of the mysticism is lost in concrete words. The same is true of his plays when they are staged without sustaining the illusion of the Oriental atmosphere. In native language, the rhythm and music surpass and interpret the words. The swaying movement accompanies many odes and invocations. A song that may be chanted with the music of the flute, and thus appreciated, is one of the mystical lyrics beginning, "I am restless. I am athirst for faraway things. My soul goes out in a longing to touch the skirts of the dim distance. O great beyond, O the keen call of my flute. I forget, I ever forget, that I have no wings, that I am bound in this spot, evermore." Gora, a so-called novel by Rabindranath Tagore, has been issued this current year. It tells the story of a Hindu youth, a Brahmin, whose full name is Gurmohan Babu. He cherishes a large-souled ambition to unify India, but he cannot break down the barriers of his religious fanaticism enough to consent to the marriage of his younger brother, Binway Babu, to a girl of a lower Brahmin caste. The romantic interest vibrates from the love affairs of Gora to that of his brother. The chief merit of the book is not its art as fiction, for that is negative, but the graphic presentation of religious tenets and native customs. The author seems, at times, to be seriously concerned about the development of his hero and the more tolerant brother. In other places, he introduces an element of whimsical humor and kindly irony, as in the unexpected sequel of Gora's parentage, poetry, and essays or short tales, rather than fiction of long-sustained plot, are the forms of writing best adapted to his gifts. As the gardener represents the youth of Rabindranath Tagore, with normal desires fused with spiritual longings, so Gitanjali is the expression of the mature philosopher-poet, still responsive emotionally, but seeking for joy eternal. He is preserved for world literature the philosophy and poetry of earlier teachers like Chaitanya Deva, usually called Nimai, the Hindu poet, who lived near Bolpur, the home of Tagore. In addition to these revivals of the earlier tenets and aspirations in poetry, Rabindranath Tagore has become an international humanist. He has never lost his joy in nature and in solitude, but he has walked forward into the vision of a united brotherhood and a spiritual commonwealth. Romain, Rolland, and Jean-Christophe. In 1916, the prize of 1915 has been awarded. Rolland, Romain, born 1866, as homage to the exalted idealism in his authorship, and also to the sympathy and truth with which he has drawn different types of people. There was no prize money awarded in literature for 1914. The announcement that the winner for 1915 was Romain Rolland, author of Jean-Christophe, was generally approved. Here was an instance when a single book had focused attention of readers and the judges. This masterpiece, which had appeared in France at intervals from 1904 to 1912, had been translated into many languages and much discussed. It was a mirror of the conditions of society, especially in France and Germany, at the junction of the 19th and 20th centuries. It was an exhaustive, vital life story of a musician with aspirations, struggles, loves, defeats, revolts, friendships, and tragic, but triumphant, end. In the biography of Rolland by Stefan Zweig, emphasis is laid upon the period of nearly 50 years of the author's life as a quiet scholar and musician, an artist working without serious interruption or serious recognition, and then a sudden, disturbing publicity which followed in the wake of this novel. Romain Rolland, Clamecy, a little town of the Morvan on the Nivernais Canal, was the birthplace of Romain Rolland, January 29, 1866. His father was a notary. His mother was daughter of a magistrate. She was musical and religious, devoted to her son and the younger child, Madeleine. Their happy home life is reflected in pages of the section Antoinette in Jean-Christophe. When he was young, Rolland showed taste for music, and his mother taught him and told him stories about great musicians. When his school days ended at the communal college in his native town, his father, with rare self-sacrifice, gave up his law practice in Clamecy and went to Paris, becoming clerk in a bank that the boy might be educated in the best schools. After attendance at the Lycée Louis-le-Grand until he was 20, he entered the École Normale Supérieure, where he specialized in history. Gabriel Monod was a teacher of surpassing influence over the minds and characters of his students. Rolland was enthusiastic about Tolstoy, both as reformer and writer. For Shakespeare, he had ardent admiration, especially for the historical plays and sonnets. Another friend of these tentative years was Paul Claudel, the author of books with mystical tendencies upon the history of Catholicism. Already Rolland had expressed a fugitive, recurrent wish to write a romance, the history of a single-hearted artist who bruises himself against the rocks of life. Such was the norm of Jean-Christophe. He was surprised, and not wholly pleased, when he was told that he had won a travelling scholarship from the normal school and could go to the French School of Archaeology and History at Rome. For 2 years he stayed in this city, making contacts with some of the vital influences of his life, notably the friendship with Fräulein Malvida von Meisenberg. She was many years his senior, but still alert and inspiring. She knew intimately scores of statesmen, writers, and artists, as references in her book Mémoire d'un idéaliste testify. She took a profound interest in this young Frenchman with his musical gifts and visionary hopes. In his essay, To the Undying Antigone, Rolland speaks of his gratitude to 2 women, his mother and Fräulein von Meisenberg. With the latter he went to visit Wagner at Bayreuth and increased his musical enthusiasm and knowledge. One day, as he was walking on the Janiculum, the germ idea and plan of his epic novel, Jean-Christophe, formed in his mind, but its writing was delayed for many years. Back in Paris as lecturer at the normal school and at the Sorbonne, he determined to attack indifference to the fine arts. His thesis had a title of arresting words for that time: The Origins of the Modern Lyrical Drama. While in Rome, he had written a few plays that were not made public: Orsino, Caligula, and Niobe. He was eager to increase interest in music at the normal school and elsewhere. He attended musical festivals at Bonn and Strasbourg and began that series of biographies published later as Musicians of Former Days, Musicians of Today, Beethoven, Handel, and other volumes. He married the daughter of Michael Breal, the philologist, at whose home he met noted men of letters, science, and art. His wife was cultured and sympathetic with his aspirations to extend knowledge of music and art among the people. He rebelled against educational restrictions, as well as political reactions. In such moods he wrote plays such as Danton, 14th of July, Triumph of Reason, and St. Louis, a heroic legend. He urged popularizing of the theatre and lamented the dominance of the aristocratic theatre. Some of the articles which he wrote at different times on this theme have been translated by Barrett H. Clark as The People's Theatre, New York, 1918. He looked to the theatre as beneficial to the people in 3 ways. 1. As a source of joy. 2. As a source of energy. 3. As a source of guiding light to the intelligence. Before Rolland had really found himself in literature, the Dreyfus case racked his sensitive soul. In almost all his later writings, there are references, direct or implied, to this welter of feeling which divided families and shattered friendships. At the time of the trial, he wrote, "He who can see injustice without trying to combat it is neither entirely an artist nor entirely a man." He wrote a dramatic parable, Les Loups, Wolves, under the pseudonym of Saint-Just, in which he lifted the problem from the realm of time into that of the eternal. As the political strife became more personal and bitter, Rolland retired from public attention and devoted himself to writing lives of artists like Michelangelo and Millet and musicians. He contributed the first chapters of Jean-Christophe to the literary magazine, Cahiers de la Quinzaine, known to students only for many years. In two small rooms on the fifth floor of a Parisian house, above the boulevard Montparnasse, Rolland wrote and read, seeing a few friends, taking walks, and playing the piano for recreation. Outwardly, he was serene. Inwardly, he was seething with indignation at the falsities and hypocrisy of life, at the disdain shown for spiritual values, at the world dying of asphyxia in its prudent and vile egoism, as he expressed it in Jean-Christophe. Slowly, without any aids of publicity, the real value of Jean-Christophe became apparent to critics and discriminating readers. As the last volumes appeared in the magazine, German journalists called attention to its unique merits. Paul Seipel, the Swiss writer, related the life and earlier work of Rolland. In June 1913, Rolland was given the Grand Prix of the French Academy translation of Jean-Christophe, was made into English by Gilbert Cannon, and critics awakened. The same year Rolland republished some of the plays written in his student days, under the title Les Tragédies de la Foi. By examples of such heroes as Saint Louis and Ayat, he would inspire the people of the 20th century to a new idealism. His play, Wolves, has been staged in Yiddish in New York, has been translated into English by Barrett H. Clark, and has been performed at the University of Minnesota. In his epic story of a musician and his associates, Rolland was a preacher of aspiration and harmony to the whole world, in spite of localized atmosphere. He recalled the words of Goethe, "National literature now means very little. The epoch of world literature is at hand." And he urged, "Let us make Goethe's prophecy a living reality." His hero was to have a long, circuitous journey in his search for expression of his aspirations. He was to meet many kinds of people and races. He was to have some of the tragic experiences of musicians of real life, Beethoven, Wagner, and Hugo Wolf. He was to keep aloft the banner of idealism, of faith in humanity. Like the author, he was to be victimized by the hard realities of life and disillusionments. The book was to have many themes and varied notes, but was to be blended at the last into a perfect symphony. The preludes were written in 1895 to 1897. The last chords were played in October 1912. Parts were written in France and Italy. Others, in Switzerland and England. No work of fiction of such prodigious length, totaling more than 1,550 pages, in the 3-volume edition translated by Gilbert Cannon, could be written without many lapses, many passages of uneven merit. Some of the characters are vital and haunting to the memory, like Olivier, Grazia, Antoinette, Sabine, Jacqueline, Emmanuel, Dr. Braun, besides the hero. Others flit across the pages and are forgotten. Condensation of some chapters would add to their effectiveness, but the author's discursive, intuitive comments make a valuable asset of the book. It may be reread in parts with enjoyment, just as a musical program for an evening has selected movements in a fugue or a symphony. When it was suggested to Rolland that he seemed to show enmity towards Germany by some of the reproaches of her false standards, his reply was, "I am not in the least an enemy of Germany." In proof, he cited that he had rated soundly as many faults in France, in Volume 5, as he had in Germany in Volume 4. He contended that Germany had creative energy and moral vigor, but that she was sick in this 20th century, just as France was diseased and needed to be purged to restore her noble qualities. Heroic souls are found in both countries, but the people, as a whole, fail to interpret each other aright. Unless such understanding can be established in friendship, War will sunder the nations. Such was the prophetic message of Jean-Christophe, which was fulfilled 2 years later. His book was intended as a common heritage for all of Europe. Time will fix the exact status of this epic novel and its lasting influence upon international thought. It may be classified as allegory, romance, psychological study, or idealistic vision. It has sincerity, inspiration, and imaginative intensity. The author's statement that he always thought of the life of his hero as analogous to a river is significant. He sustains the imagery from the first dawn, morning youth, and revolt in Germany, to the very end of the journey across the border, to the final act where Saint Christopher hears the roar of the torrent, but also the tranquil voice of the child as the Angelus sounds forth. The New Day Gilbert Cannon has compared the phases of life explored by Jean-Christophe to the tortuous channel of an uncharted river. His judgment that this novel is the first great book of the 20th century is more stable than the prophecy of other critics that would leave out the word first. It has many passages of artistic perfection, like Antoinette, The House, and The New Dawn. With emotional fervor, the author, in the closing volume, speaks his message to the future, apostrophizing the young men. You men of today, march over us, trample us under your feet, and press onward. Be ye greater and happier than we. Life is a succession of deaths and resurrections. We must die, Christophe, to be born again. And since the award, what has Rolland written? Colas Brognon, The Tale of a Burgundian Artist, translated in 1919 by Catherine Miller, is less intense, much more free and diverting than his long novel. It was a work of relaxation for the author during the summer months in Switzerland, 1913. He had recently visited his birth town and modelled the hero, in part, from a resident, a wood carver there, an artist of the vanished type. He has his struggles and defeats, but he never loses his optimism. The next year the war began, with its devastating, soul-searing effects upon Rolland. He had seen its black shadow and had forewarned the people in Jean-Christophe, but the actual conflict overwhelmed his spirit. Like Olivier, in his story, whom he resembles in many ways, he had feared such a war from boyhood. It had been a nightmare to him. It had poisoned his childhood days. He was at Vevey, on Lake Geneva, when the war broke out, and he decided to stay there. He longed for France, but he could not fight without blighting his soul. He would suffer as a pacifist, loving his country, rather than yield to hate. He did secretarial work for the Red Cross, and assisted in welfare measures of many kinds. When the Nobel Prize money came, he gave it to the mitigation of the miseries of Europe. He wrote some of the papers that were collected in Above the Battle, his friendly letter to Hauptmann, appealing for amity, and the Germans' reply, are given here. In spite of the aggressive tone of the Germans' note, Rolland refused to believe that the ideals of human brotherhood had been destroyed. They were suffering eclipse temporarily, but would relive in The New Dawn. To Woodrow Wilson, in the later months of the war, Rolland made an appeal to be the arbiter of the free peoples. On the day of the armistice, he issued a manifesto, L'Humanité, a call to brain workers, comrades all through the world, to reconstruct a fraternal union. The play, The Montespan, translated by Helena van Brugge de Kay, is called a sequel to Above the Battle. He had written, during these days of seclusion and thought, his study and appreciation of Mahatma Gandhi, the man who became one with the universal being, translated by Catherine D. Groth, which has been quoted in the previous chapter upon Rabindranath Tagore. As relaxation, he wrote Liluli, a comedy with the goddess of illusion as its heroine. There are some lines of satire and some of burlesque, as the combatants wrestle. It was symbolic of France during the war years, as he viewed his country, scorning truth and heaping up ruins of past greatness. This has been illustrated with 32 wood engravings by Franz Masereel, New York, 1920. While Rolland was exercising his ironical wit upon this picture of war, he was writing Clérambault, the story of an independent spirit during the war, a sad portrayal of a pacifist. This has been translated by Catherine Miller, New York, 1921. It is a dissertation more than a story, a presentation of the author's own sentiments, with much philosophy about life and conflicts. The man Clérambault passes through strange spiritual experiences. The early scenes of his rural home life, peaceful and happy, are contrasted with his fanaticism when he reaches Paris and urges his son, Maxime, to enter the army. Then come reactions, after the death of the son and his own probings of conscience. The author interprets the tale as a tragedy for the man and his wife, but a triumph of freedom for his soul. There are many autobiographical touches in this psychological story. In 1922, there appeared in Paris, from the pen of Rolland, the first volumes of L'Âme Enchantée, which is now appearing in English version, by Ben Ray Redman, as Annette and Sylvie. The prelude and a second volume, Summer, translated by Eleanor Stimson and Van Wyck Brooks. In his foreword, the author tells his readers that they are starting with him upon a new journey, which will not be so long as that of Jean-Christophe, but will include more than one stage. He asks suspension of judgment until the tale is finished, quoting the old adage, La fin loue la vie, et le soir le jour. He expresses the domination that his characters gain over him, Jean, Colas, Annette, so that he becomes no more than the secretary of their thoughts. No thesis nor theory is in this story, but it is another life history, struggling to find truth, to reach harmony of spirit amid many kinds of buffetings and joys. Two girls, half-sisters, Annette and Sylvie, afford him scope for sharp antitheses in character drawing. Annette is a girl of fine health and brain, educated at the Sorbonne. She had adored her father, but because of some letters which she found after his death, she realizes his infidelities to her mother and understands his secretive smiles. She locates her half-sister, who never bore his name. Sylvie, pretty, uneducated, capricious, gay, unmoral. The deep passions of Annette, her reserves and independence, her repugnance to any possessiveness on the part of her lover, Roger Brissot, and his family, lead to a scene of erotic realism. This is followed by words of the author's own creed, his search for truth. I am not one of those who fear the fatigues of the road. I am seeking. I am convinced that it is possible to love one's child, loyally perform one's domestic task, and still keep enough of oneself, as one ought to, for the most essential thing, one's soul. The second volume reveals the material and spiritual conflicts of Annette as a mother and teacher, and Sylvie's experiences in marriage and business. In his latest book, as in his earlier plays and fiction, Monsieur Rolland has revealed that idealism, which in his philosophy means harmony and freedom of both aspiration and action, his form is often careless and sometimes crude, but it has high lights of great beauty and true art. In his own life, he has waged many battles that have left scars upon his sensitive temperament and fine soul. They have never shattered his spiritual creed, his faith in humanity. He has written ardently in behalf of international friendship and intellectual unity. In the future, he may be ranked as a prophet as well as a scholar, a seer as well as a writer. Amid the turmoil of his generation, he has been a force, making for peace. He has held high the banner of world fellowship and sounded the challenge against racial jealousies.